Today I'm going to be taking a look at the ANBERNIC RG405M. The M might as well stand for monster because this thing is an absolute beast and is the best handheld that ANBERNIC has made to date. Now we got a lot to cover, so let's get right into it. Getting the technical stuff out of the way, the 405M sports a 4-inch IPS display, is rocking a Unisoc T618 clocked at 2 GHz. It's got 4 GB of RAM, 128 GB of internal storage. This one came with an additional 128 GB memory stick that has over 3,000 games. It's running Android 12 and uses ANBERNIC's custom Android skin that makes it really easy to shuffle through emulators and games. But at the push of a button, you can switch to default Android 12 and use this thing in a type of tablet mode, allowing you to install apps, stream media, and browse the web. The build quality on this thing is absolutely insane. It's encased in an aluminum shell, and everything just feels really well put together. It's got some solid weight to it, and it's just overall a really nice design. One of the drawbacks is this thing's a bit of a dust magnet. While filming this video, I kept having to blow on it and wipe it down, but a minor inconvenience for such a well-built machine. You have 4 face buttons, 2 clickable analog sticks, and a directional pad. You have a start and select button, as well as this button on the bottom left that serves as a home as well as a back button. Tap it once for back, hold it down for home. On its backside, you got more of this gorgeous aluminum and these 2 rubber pads, allowing for better grip. On the bottom, you got these 2 speaker grills, a headphone jack, and the port for the micro SD card. Top side, you have a power button, the volume rocker, a USB Type-C port, and a grill for ventilation. You have the 4 shoulder buttons, and I can't express enough how much I dislike this design. These horizontal triggers need to go away and never come back. But besides being displeased with the design, the quality of the shoulder buttons are outstanding. The menu is really smooth, easy to navigate, and user-friendly. You can cycle between a few custom skins. I prefer this very basic one, but there are some really good options here. As I previously stated, this thing comes with over 3,000 games, but what you'll notice is that the majority of the games are for some of the older consoles, like some of your 8-bit, 16-bit, as well as older handhelds. When you start getting up there to like the PlayStation 2 emulator, the Nintendo Wii emulator, the selection of games seems to thin out. But it's not too much of an issue because it's really easy to add your own ROMs to this thing. So first thing I'm going to do is test out a bunch of games that came pre-installed in the system, and then I'm going to add some of my own ROMs and see how well those run. The 405M seems to run all of your 8-bit and 16-bit consoles and handhelds exceptionally well. Everything ran smooth and it had a really good game selection. But let's be honest, most of us aren't buying this device to play SNES and Sega Genesis. We want to see how some of the heavy stuff performs. Nintendo 64 was a similar story. The games that were installed on here ran really well, not to mention looked really great on this 4-inch display. Now when it comes to the games I added myself, for the N64 I decided to go with Killer Instinct Gold and WWF No Mercy. Not only because those are 2 really good games, but those are 2 games that are notoriously difficult to run on a lot of these handheld emulation devices. And I have to say the 405M did not disappoint. Both of these games ran really well. Killer Instinct having a few graphical hiccups at the character select screen, but outside of that, both were very playable. When it came to PlayStation 1, it had a really good game selection, and everything ran really well. The frame rate stood consistent 99% of the time, and I think out of all the games I played, I only experienced 1 graphical hiccup, and that was for a brief second. Sega Dreamcast, similar to PlayStation 1, had one of the better libraries pre-installed. Not to mention performed exceptionally well. Dreamcast is one of the better performing emulators on this console, and everything looked really good on this display. And with the design of the 405M, it was extremely comfortable to play some shoot 'em ups in vertical mode. The pre-installed PlayStation 2 game selection was pretty thin. Now it's far from perfect, you are going to get some frame rate dips and a few graphical hiccups, but it's still pretty impressive how well this thing handles PlayStation 2. I honestly wasn't expecting much, and it far exceeded my expectation. It just barely misses the mark of running perfect PlayStation 2 emulation. Now when it comes to the games that I added, I went with Marvel vs. Capcom 2 because that's one of the greatest fighting games of all time. And I was pretty disappointed it did not run well. There was quite a bit of slowdown, and when I tried to use frame skip, it just made it completely unplayable. I added Contra Shattered Soldier, because that's one of my favorite running gun titles, and it's not a particularly resource heavy game. The 405M handled it very well. Frame rate stood consistent and is completely playable. I also added SmackDown Here Comes the Pain, because that's arguably one of the greatest wrestling games of all time, and is one of my personal favorites for the PlayStation 2. Now, it wasn't initially playable. It was going really choppy and running really slow, but once I turned on frame skip, the game ran pretty close to 100%. The only drawback was the audio sounded really choppy and awful. So if you don't mind playing this game on mute, the 405M handles it really well with frame skip on. With GameCube, I encountered similar issues as I did with PlayStation 2, maybe to a slightly lesser degree, but I still encountered some frame rate dips and a few graphical hiccups. The games I did try were overall playable, but I didn't add any additional GameCube games. Now when it comes to Wii emulation, it had Tatsunoko vs. Capcom pre-installed, and it was playable, far from perfect, but playable enough that you can enjoy the game. I added New Super Mario Bros. Wii, and I just had a ton of frame rate dips. It's at that borderline mark where it's almost playable, but I couldn't play it this way. One unique thing I noticed is that the gyro controls actually work for the Wii emulator. I thought that was pretty cool. Switching over to PSP, the game selection was really solid, and you're going to get some really solid performance out of this console. Really consistent frame rates, and very few graphical hiccups. But for me personally, I just didn't like the way PSP games looked on here. I kept trying to mess with the aspect ratios, but the game still looked kind of flat and stretched out. Maybe I'm being picky because I love the PSP so much, but you're still going to get really solid performance. And at the end of the day, that's all that really matters. I also had a few frame rate dips while playing Peace Walker, but it wasn't enough to affect the game. The game still was very playable. DS and 3DS ran beautifully. The only real challenge was trying to get both displays to fit on screen comfortably. The perfect setup will vary game by game, and it can be quite tedious to find that sweet spot, but performance-wise, they ran really good. So the ANBERNIC RG405M. This is without question the best handheld emulation console I've ever tried. And although some of the more high-end emulation isn't perfect, it's more than functional, and the vast majority of the games installed run well enough to be enjoyed. It's insane how far we've come in such a short period of time. I'll more than likely be doing a follow-up where I install a bunch more games and really try to push this thing to see what kind of performance we can get out of it. But if you guys are interested in the ANBERNIC RG405M, I'll put links in the description below. Until next time, this is Ness, signing out.